Chapter 10. Nothing changes. What do you mean my mom said your sister called her? Amity shrugged, just as confused as Luce was. I don't know, but that's what she told me. She said my sister was going to send over my legal documents. The two girls were sitting on Luce's bed once more. The door closed so that Camila couldn't hear them. Luce was just staring and slowly shaking her head now, her mind racing 1,000 miles a minute. But you don't even have legal documentation. None that would be accepted in this realm anyway. This was scary. This was really, really freaking scary. And even if Ed and Em knew how to make a forgery, which they shouldn't, especially since they have no idea what this is actually supposed to look like. Amity didn't put general forgery beyond her siblings, but this would have required a lot more skill than the sick notes they faked occasionally. M-Scroll wouldn't be able to call your mom's phone. Yeah, there's absolutely no way you'd be able to reach our landline with a magic scroll, Luce confirmed. So, who was that? Amity whispered, glancing around the room as if to check for someone watching them. She glanced at the open curtains, pulling them close as fast as she could with shaking hands, almost throwing the plant off the windowsill in the process. Oh, sorry, plant. The two girls exchanged uneasy looks. Actually, you know what makes this even weirder? Luce started, moving closer to Amity to ease her discomfort a little. Your siblings called earlier. They said they wanted to talk to you about something. But I really doubt it was that. Luce had been thinking about a way to talk to Amity about that call anyway, and this was a good time as any to bring it up. Despite still not knowing what Edric and Emerald had hinted at, it had seriously freaked Luce out, and keeping it from her friend didn't feel right to her. Amity blinked. The twins called? Luce nodded. Sorry for picking up, by the way, but I thought it might be important and my impulses kind of got the better of me. She mumbled awkwardly, giving Amity an apologetic look. She hadn't thought about it at the time, but that had kind of been a breach of privacy, which she swore not to do again after the diary incident. God, I'm such a mess. It's really okay. Amity managed a small smile. If it had been the twins that had picked up a call for her, this would have been a different situation entirely. But Amity trusted Luce in a way she never trusted anyone in her life. I know you just meant well. Amity felt a rush of guilt-tangled relief that she hadn't been home to take the call. She still wasn't sure how she'd react to hearing her siblings' voices after their last conversation. Amity backtracked a couple of words, the realization hitting her completely out of nowhere. Did I just think of this place as home? When had she started considering Luce's house her home? Yet, the more she thought about it, despite how much this unfamiliar environment freaked her out, and how much she needed to be back in the bowling aisles, for her friends, and her studies, and her future, there were things she didn't miss in the slightest. She thought of her parents since she'd gotten here, sure, but only while worrying about disappointing them or her inevitable punishment. Not once had she actively wished to trade the lively dinners with Luce and her mom for the silent family dinners they held back at the manor, on the rare occasion that both of her parents were actually available to have dinner with their children. Not once had she missed the sound of the heavy front door closing that announced her father's arrival, or the sound of her mother's heels on the wooden floor when she walked up the stairs. Amity didn't miss the huge empty manor, and the more she thought about it, the harder it was to convince herself she missed her parents at all. Wasn't that a thing she was supposed to do? She knew Luce had missed Camila a ton over the summer. So, why didn't Amity miss her own parents? Why? When she thought of going home, did she think of school or the library or Willow and Gus, but not the place where she actually lived? Thorns. She didn't even miss her siblings as much as she should have. She missed them more than she did her parents, sure. But despite the fact that their relationship had improved recently, Amity still couldn't help but second-guess their intentions sometimes. She never had to do that with Luce. might have yelled at Emma a little. Luz mumbled sheepishly. I know you said not to get mad at her, but I couldn't stop thinking about you crying in my arms, and I just lost it. Amity was more than a little touched by that. Although she did feel bad about that being her initial reaction, Emma didn't really deserve to be yelled at for going through with a plan Amity had come up with, even though what she'd said had hurt immensely. It's really sweet that you're so protective of me. She bit her lip and reached out her hand towards Luz, who took it, slowly stroking her thumb across Amity's knuckles. Well, you're really important to me. Amity blushed and couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. So, of course I'm protective of you. That means a lot. Really. Amity leaned against Luz slightly, letting out a soft sigh before returning to a topic she would much rather avoid. How did Emma react? Luz hesitated for a moment before mumbling. She said she's glad you have someone in your life that cares about you as much as I do. Oh, wow. That was maybe the closest Amity could imagine her sister getting to straight up admitting she'd messed up. For what it's worth, I think Edric and Emma are really sorry. I've never seen them as genuine and serious as during the chat we had. Luz eyed the floor. She still felt awful for making Emma cry. That doesn't mean you have to forgive them, of course, she added quickly. You're hurting right now, and I never try and talk you into doing something you're not ready for. But I just thought that's something I should maybe let you know. Okay, Amity mumbled, her eyes watering a bit. That made her feel even worse about not talking to them. But she just didn't feel up to it right now. She'd need more time to process everything before she'd be ready for an actual conversation. Instead, Amity pulled her scroll out of her pocket, unlocked it, opened the chat she shared with her sister, and nearly dropped her scroll as her hands started to shake. I can't do this. This was stupid. It was just texting. She didn't even have to look at them, and she knew the twins didn't mean any of what they'd said. So why was this so hard? Hey. Luz, immediately noticing the change in her friend's mood, moved even closer and started gently stroking Amity's head to comfort her. Everything okay? No. Amity handed the scroll over. Would you mind texting Em and asking her about the call your mom got? The floor was suddenly the most fascinating thing in the room as she struggled to force her next words out. And also maybe telling her that I'm not ready to talk to her and Ed right now. Oh, Amity. Luz gently pulled her into a hug. Of course I don't mind. Amity felt relief wash over her, followed by an immense feeling of guilt. Thank you. Emma confirmed their suspicions that she hadn't been the one to talk to Camila, leaving the girls to swap theories about who it had been instead, how they knew what was going on, and what their goal was. Unfortunately, they soon realized that without additional information, they couldn't figure out anything. If that Emra imitator really would send them fake papers for Amity, maybe they could gain a couple clues from those once they arrived? In the meantime, they'd keep an eye out for any possibly suspicious activity happening around them, and not drive each other completely crazy discussing possibilities they couldn't confirm or disapprove either way. As unnerving as that was, they had more important things to take care of right now that would lead to actual results. The most pressing issue being the changing of Amity's bandages and application of new healing glyphs. Luz glanced at the clock. 9:23 p.m. Perfect. How are you sure your mom isn't gonna walk in this time? Amity asked with a nervous glance at the door. Luz smiled. There's this really bad rom-com series she likes that she always catches around this time when she doesn't have to work late. Ah, okay. Amity had no clue what this rom-com thing was supposed to be, or why it needed to be caught. But she already felt stupid constantly asking about everything, so she declined to bring it up. It probably wasn't that important anyway. She felt her heart race when Luz moved closer to her again. So, Luz looked at Amity and raised an eyebrow, slightly amused despite her lingering worry over the phone call. Are you gonna take your shirt off? Oh yeah, right! Amity blushed, flustered at being caught spacing out like that. They'd done this several times now, and she was somehow still incredibly nervous each time. Sorry, Amity mumbled as she carefully pulled her shirt over her head. Lou smiled at her, then gently removed the bandage to take a look at the injury. The improvement, even from yesterday, was clear. Still, even though it was certainly healing faster than conventional medicine could have managed, Luz had hoped Amity would be fully healed at this point. To be fair, the wounds she treated over the summer had mostly been minor injuries, which this wasn't, and neither of them had been a burn injury. For all she knew, this could be ahead of schedule. Still, improvement was improvement. Amity was able to move around more easily again, and while she did still flinch during treatment, it was obvious that it didn't hurt anywhere near as bad as it had when Luz had first treated it. There you go, she whispered after she'd finished wrapping a fresh bandage around the injury and applied the glyphs. How are you feeling? Amity, who looked like someone had dipped her head into a bucket of red paint, was quietly wondering if she'd ever stop becoming such a flustered mess when Luz touched her like this. Better, thanks. She pulled the pajama top back over her head, hesitating but once again managing to find the courage to intertwine her fingers with Luz's. Was a gesture as small as that supposed to make her skin tingle as much as it did? Physical contact came so naturally to Luz. Amity wondered if she could ever learn to be more like that. Luz stroked Amity's hand gently, and if it hadn't been for everything Amity had on her mind right now, this moment would have been perfect. The two sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. Eventually, Luz took out her phone and began to scroll lazily through it with her free hand, still tracing aimless patterns on Amity's skin with the other. Oh, look! The author whose fanfiction I read posted a canon-compliant one-shot after they watched the movie. They work fast, wow, Luz chuckled, pushing down her own worries in the hopes of distracting Amity from hers. Maybe we could read that? Sure. Amity didn't really feel up for it, but she refused to disappoint Luz by telling her that. They started reading, but neither girl was able to truly immerse themselves in the story, preoccupied as they were with their respective troubles. Just a couple of paragraphs in, both Luz and Amity sighed and said almost simultaneously, I can't seem to focus, sorry. Listen, I'm sorry, but... They looked at each other and snorted. I'm pretty sure we're both forgiven then. Luz chuckled, nudging Amity gently. Amity managed a small smile. That she was the only one unable to focus made her feel slightly better. Yeah, guess so. Luz bookmarked the story for later, then put her phone away, giving Amity her undivided attention once more. Do you want to talk about what's on your mind? Amity pushed all the things she wasn't ready to confront into the back of her mind and mumbled, I'm worried about tomorrow. That technically wasn't even untrue, even if it wasn't what was bothering her the most. She really was nervous about going to school here. Hey, it's going to be okay, I promise. Luz gave her hand a comforting squeeze. Was it just Amity, or was she being especially touchy today, even by Luz standards, and smiled at her. You can ask me anything you want if you think that will help you make you feel better. Amity was almost certain Luz knew something else was up, that she didn't press the issue, instead allowing Amity the space to bring it up on her own time, was something Amity appreciated immensely. Maybe that's not a bad idea. And so, Luz spent the rest of the evening answering Amity's questions about human school to prepare her for the following day. Amity slept peacefully that night. The smell of wet grass, the sound of Luz's beautiful laughter, and the feeling of a soft hand in hers filling her dreams. Luz stayed up a bit later, telling herself that it was just because she wanted to make sure Amity was actually asleep and not suffering another nightmare before Luz slept herself. But really? It was a lot more than that. The call with the twins had been worrying enough, but that someone had called her mom and pretended to be Emerald was freaky on a whole new level. And even if she forced herself to not think of any of that, she found herself nervous about Amity seeing her school. Or, more precisely, meeting her classmates. When her mom had first talked about it, Luz had been excited about the prospect of her friend going to school with her. But that had died down quickly after the sour reminder of how much school here sucked. Amity's arms around her were probably the only reason Luz eventually managed to fall asleep, despite the pit in her stomach. It's too early for this nonsense. Willow sighed as she walked towards her locker to pick up the books for her first class, mentally preparing herself for another day of hushed whispers about the Blight siblings haunting the hallways. It hadn't taken long for the rumors to start. Amity's absence was something people noticed immediately, seeing as over the years, she'd built a reputation of dragging herself to school even when half dead, not wanting to miss class unless absolutely necessary. Willow could recall at least 2 separate occasions where Amity had passed out in class out of a stubborn refusal to go to the healer, and then stayed for the rest of the school day anyway, arguing that what she had wasn't contagious, so whether she stayed or not should be up to her. If that in itself wasn't enough, the fact that the twins hadn't been seen all week really got people talking. The twins skipped school all the time, but usually when they did, there were sightings of them around town, or things went suspiciously awry in a way that had Blight twin nonsense written all over it. That or they just left illusion versions of themselves at school, so they wouldn't get in trouble for skipping. Not that the other students thought they could get into any real trouble in the first place, seeing how influential their parents were. This time, none of that had happened, and people were taking notice. It was as if all the Blight children had just disappeared overnight, and nothing remained of them but the hallway whispers. Titan, people were being way too dramatic about this. Do you really think Amity died? I heard she got eaten by a slither beast, came the immediate reply, resulting in loud gasps. Willow shuffled past the 3 guys from her grade as fast as she could, not even bothering to question where they'd gotten that information. She shook her head as she opened her locker. These guys can't be serious. This place was starting to feel less like a school and more like a ridiculously large game of Whisper Demon. Sure, sometimes students got eaten, but that was nowhere near as likely as the occasional hallway rumors led to believe. And people blowing the situation out of proportion after barely 3 days was laughable. But Amity, Edric, and Emra were pretty well known all throughout school, and since their parents were coven leaders, their absence was significantly more interesting than that of the average witch high schooler. Since Gus and Willow knew what had actually happened, these rumors were less concerning than mildly annoying, and they mostly just tuned them out, which was easy enough, because nobody asked them if they knew anything, despite the 2 of them being the closest ones to Amity before her disappearance. Gossip was way more interesting than the truth after all. The book she needed in her arms, Willow was ready to walk to her magic history class and slog through another mostly normal day at school before she could get back to her real work, the portal. But, unbeknownst to Willow, her world was about to turn just a little more upside down. 3 weeks? Okay, we're officially screwed. Scar covered her eyes with her hands. This was really bad. Ugh, tell me about it, Basha groaned. Dad's super mad at me, and Mom will probably turn this into some sad attempt to bond with me or whatever. I swear, she's gonna strangle me with her weird perception of affection until I lose my mind. I can't wait for this cast to come off again. Amelia shook her head in disbelief. I still can't believe you broke your arm in 2 places. The injury had looked bad when they'd taken her to the healer the day before, but this was even worse than they'd expected. This whole situation felt weird to Amelia. She had been playing alongside Basha for quite some time now, and while there had been occasional injuries, this wasn't surprising. Grudgeby was a dangerous sport after all. She couldn't remember Basha ever getting hurt this badly during training. The team captain was reckless sometimes, sure, but she also wasn't stupid. Winning a game might have been something she considered worth breaking a limb for under certain circumstances. But training? That wasn't like her. Not that that was any of Amelia's business, though. Basha groaned. Ugh, yeah, me neither. There isn't really much I can do about it now, though. Other than wait for it to heal. Skara sighed. Since Basha was their best player, this whole situation would have been bad enough even if they had a proper replacement. But since Kat was unavailable at the moment, they didn't even have that. So, not to point out the obvious, but what are we gonna do about the game next week if we can't play? They were just a couple games away from qualifying for the championships, too. This sucked. I mean, we could just ask Amity for help, right? It would be a little awkward, but she's a good player. I'm sure we could convince her to fill in for you for a bit, even if we're not exactly friends anymore, Amelia suggested. Good idea, Mel. Small problem, though. Amity is nowhere to be found. Amelia's shoulders slumped. Oh, right. Even if Scar was pretty sure the hallway rumors were at least a little more dramatic than what had actually happened, the fact remained that Amity had been missing from school all week. And since she'd blocked them all on Instagram following the Grudgeby incident about 2 months ago, reaching out to her that way wasn't an option. The memory of that incident did prompt an idea, though. Skara contemplated it for a moment, knowing full well that Basha would be less than thrilled about the suggestion, but decided that it beat letting all their hard work this year go to waste. Maybe we could ask Willow for help. Basha reacted, about as well as Skara had expected. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? My hearing must have been damaged yesterday as well, because I could have sworn you just suggested replacing me with half a witch of all people. Maybe I did, Skara shot back immediately. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that that was a great idea. Even outside of Grudgeby, having Willow on the team would have its perks. If it turned out anything had actually happened to Amity, Willow and Gus were the people most likely to know outside of the twins. So getting on her good side for once probably wouldn't be such a bad idea. I mean, she did play pretty well during our game earlier this summer, Amelia piped up, but was silenced by a deadly glare from Basha almost instantly. Wow, Skara, your sense of humor has reached its peak really early today. Letting half a witch take my place on the Grudgeby team? That might just be the funniest joke you've had all year. She let the most forced laugh Skara had ever heard and wiped a non-existent tear away before glaring at her best friend. That loser? On our team? Titan, no. Forget it. You've gone mad if you're seriously suggesting that. I'd play with a broken arm before letting that happen. Skara rolled her eyes. You're being a little dramatic about this, don't you think? Even if I wanted to, this isn't an option. A player with a broken arm is totally useless. You'd only get in our way. Also, Allie would rip my head off if I let you play despite the injury. No thank you. Don't you dare bring my sister into this. Trying to argue with Basha when she was like this was usually a lost cause, but Skara didn't back down. I wouldn't have to bring your sister into this if you would stop being so ridiculous. We're down a team member. Amity is missing in action, and we also will pull off that thorn vault without an injury this time. Skara was tired of this. The solution here should have been obvious. But of course, things could never be that easy if they involved Basha. Yeah, except for the one Basha caused, Amelia mumbled quietly. The potion track witch clenched her fists. Listen, I can maybe consider forgiving you for making the suggestion to replace me with her, she said in Skara's direction, completely ignoring Amelia. You probably hit your head somewhere, because that's the only reason I can think of why you'd suddenly forget all about half of which being a total loser and think of her as a worthy replacement for me. Basha's voice was shaking with anger, though it sounded a touch more unhinged than even her usual scorn. All you have to do is take back your suggestion and beg for forgiveness, and then everything can go back to normal. Otherwise... She trailed off, but her tone spoke volumes. Under different circumstances, that threat might have worked. But not this time. They worked too hard for how far they gotten to lose to Basha's ego rather than a different team. Scar refused to let her best friend ruin this for them. You know what? No! She crossed her arms and looked Basha straight in the eyes. Aside from Amity, Willow is the best player I can think of right now. So if you don't have a better idea, I'm going to ask her. As luck would have it, Willow was standing by her locker not too far from them at the moment, and Scar was prepared to follow through. If Basha had a better idea, she would have suggested it a long time ago, and they all knew it. She was just desperately grasping at straws at this point. Honestly, playing with just 2 people would be better than playing with that loser on the team. Scar blinked. You're kidding me. That wasn't a solution to their problem, but it was a sunfire way to get disqualified. Why are you so against this anyway? Look, I know we're not exactly best friends with Willow, but right now, she's our best shot. Can't hurt to at least ask. Scar raised an eyebrow at her best friend's strange expression. What? Are you scared? Basha took just a bit too long to react. But when she did, she rolled her eyes and scoffed in her usual manner. Of half a witch? Yeah, right. She glared at Willow in displeasure as if to stress her point. I just don't like the thought of her lack of experience dragging down the team. Her tone differed slightly from how it usually sounded, with what was probably regret over not being able to play herself, mixed with something different that Scar couldn't quite place. Which wasn't really surprising. Basha had always been a difficult person to read. I don't think it will. Not any more than you and your broken arm would anyway. We don't have much to lose, do we? Scar smirked at her best friend teasingly. Besides, those are bold words coming from someone whose team she almost beat during her very first game. She did not! Basha's angry shriek was enough for Scar to decide not to push her friend any further. Poking fun at Basha was like playing with fire if she was having a bad day, and Scar knew better than to cross the line between amusing and actually dangerous. You're delusional if you think that loser and her friends ever stood the slightest chance of beating us. Scar shook her head. And you're calling me delusional. She never would have said that out loud. She didn't have a death wish. But it was honestly just sad that Basha was spending a longer time nursing her hurt ego over this than over games they'd actually lost. It had been 2 months for crying out loud. A good player should be able to complement someone else's abilities, train harder, and move on with their life otherwise. It was embarrassing to watch at this point. Okay, listen, Scara said instead, and her tone made it clear that this was a decision and no longer a discussion. We literally have nothing to lose at this point. And it's your own fault we need a replacement in the first place. Kat told us weeks ago that she'd not be able to play replacement for the next couple of games. I told you not to try that dumb move. It's not my fault you broke your arm doing it. She crossed her arms. I'm going to ask Willow for help, whether you like it or not. Basha was fuming. Scara, if you do this, you're off the team. You hear me? The Barb Track Witch shrugged. Sure, get rid of another team member. That's really helpful right now. At this point, Amelia, who usually stayed out of Scara's and Basha's squaddles and had mostly been holding back during this one, cut in. If you're willing to let the team be disqualified after how far we've come, just because you're too petty to let Willow play, maybe you're the one who should be off the team. Basha went uncharacteristically quiet at that. Scara decided that was the closest they were going to get to their team captain's permission, and began to walk towards Willow. Amelia followed right behind her, while Basha remained frozen in place. Couldn't have said it better, Mel. Thanks for backing me up. Amelia shrugged. Her attitude has gotten so much worse since the Amity incident. I swear, she had it coming. All they had to do now was ask their classmate for help. And if that didn't work, it was back to the drawing board. End of chapter.